Okay, welcome to Living with Light. Today's topic is going to be Tu B'Shvat. And this coming Sunday night slash Monday will be the 15th of Shvat. And incidentally, it's on the 15th of Shvat that we celebrate Tu B'Shvat. Just to clarify that, so the reason why it's called Tu B'Shvat is because Tu is Tes Vav, and Tes Vav is 15. And so the name of the holiday is based on the date on the calendar of Tu B'Shvat, Tes Vav Shvat, the 15th of Shvat. What is Tu B'Shvat actually about? So we associate it, I think, most commonly with it's the birthday of the trees, or it's the new year of the trees. Um, and people have all sorts of customs revolving around eating fruits, maybe particularly the fruits of Eretz Yisrael, of the land of Israel, the Shiva Saminim, the seven species. So where does all this come from? And is that really what the day is about? So the idea of Tu B'Shvat is actually mentioned first in the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah. The first Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah talks about different Rosh Hashanahs, different New Years. And the Mishnah says that there are four Rosh Hashanahs. One is the first of Nisan, and the first of Nisan is a Rosh Hashanah for kings and holidays. We're not going to go into the details of what each of those things means, but for kings can mean like if you're writing dates, so based on the year of the king, the year of the king changes, the first of Nisan. L'regalim for counting the holidays for certain purposes. The first of Elul is the Rosh Hashanah for Maser Behema, for tithing animals. What does that mean for tithing animals? So animals that are born one year have to be tithed together, and animals that are born a different year have to be tithed separately. And what is the cutoff? When is it a new year? So the new year, according to the first opinion, is the first of Elul. Then it has another opinion. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Omrim be'echad b'Tishrei. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say it's the first of Tishrei. And then it says the first of Tishrei is also Rosh Hashanah for years, for Shemitah cycles, for Yovel cycles, for Nitiya, and for Yerakos, for planting with regards to laws of Arla, which again we're not going to get into right this moment, and for tithing vegetables. So all sorts of dates that are begin a new year for certain purposes. And then it says, Be'echad b'Shvat Rosh Hashanah le'ilan. The first of Shvat is the new year for the tree. Kedivrei Beis Shammai. According, like the words of Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel Omrim B'chamisha Asar Bo. And Beis Hillel says it's the 15th of Shvat that is the new year for the trees, or the tree. If we read it carefully, it says the new year for the tree, in accordance with Beis Shammai, is the first of Shvat, and according to Beis Hillel is the 15th of Shvat. Now, what is the significance of having a new year for the trees? So there are a number of different implications of having a new year for the trees. One is with regards to the laws of Meiser, of tithing, and one is with regards to the laws of Arla and Neta Rivai, and we'll explain what those things are in a moment. So the first is with regards to tithing. So just like I mentioned before, that animals born in one year cannot be tithed on behalf of animals born in another year, and there the cutoff was either the first of Elul or the first of Tishrei. So the same is true for fruit. Fruit that are born, so to speak, in one year cannot be tithed on behalf of fruit that are born another year. And what does it mean to be born? So in this case, the Gemara refers to something called chanata. Chanata is, I think, budding. When the fruit first begins to appear, that's when the fruit is born. And the Gemara doesn't actually use the language of born. I'm using that language. What it does refer to as chanata is this budding where you start to see the fruit, and so fruit that budded before Rosh Hashanah, before the Rosh Hashanah for trees, before Tu B'Shvat, have to be tithed themselves, amongst themselves, and fruit that budded after Tu B'Shvat have to be tithed separately. What are the tithes? So the Torah has a number of tithes. The Torah has, first of all, what we call Ma'aser Rishon, the first tithe. So 10% of one's produce is given to the Leviim, the Levites. The Levites don't have a portion in the land of Israel. They are supported by all the other tribes. And so 1/10 of one's produce goes to the Levites. That's Ma'aser Rishon. Then there's something called Ma'aser Sheni, the second Ma'aser, the second tithe. And the second tithe, you get to consume it, but you have to consume it in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. And that's not practiced every year, but 4 out of the 7 years of the Shemitah cycle, you have the Ma'aser Sheni. I should mention that Ma'aser Rishon is not, no Ma'aser is practiced during the Shemitah year, so Ma'aser Rishon is practiced 6 out of the 7 years of Shemitah, the first Ma'aser that goes to Levi. Ma'aser Sheni, the second tithe, is practiced in years 1 and 2, but not 3, and in years 4 and 5 and not 6. And so 4 out of the 6 years, and that is you have to bring your 10% of your fruit, of your produce to Yerushalayim and consume it there. It's a way of getting us to Jerusalem. And if you don't want to schlep it all, then you could transfer onto money and bring money instead. That's the second kind of Ma'aser. And there's a third kind of Ma'aser, which is Ma'aser Ani, which is tithing for the poor. And tithing for the poor is practiced in the 3rd year of the Shemitah cycle and in the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle in place of Ma'aser Sheni. Now, practically speaking, we don't practice any of these Ma'asers anymore in a certain sense. So outside of the land of Israel, they don't apply. In the land of Israel, they do apply, but we don't actually end up giving them. We separate them, but we don't give them, and that has its own whole set of practice, how it's done. Actually, if one buys fruit from Israel, even if you live here, then Ma'aser would have to be separated. The one Ma'aser that we do practice now that's practical is what we call Ma'aser Ksafim. What we think probably of Ma'aser, when we think of Ma'aser, of tithing, giving 10% of one's income. And that, by most understandings, is a custom, although it's a very strong custom, and relates this. It's based on these other tithes, and but it's not the classic tithe, and it's not impacted by Tu B'Shvat. But all these other tithes are impacted by Tu B'Shvat, because fruit, and this is specific to fruit, not vegetables, fruit that grow from trees. Vegetables have their own Rosh Hashanah, which we said was the 1st of Tishrei, but fruit that budded before Tu B'Shvat, you tithe those from themselves. You have to take the 10% from those for those, and fruit that budded after Tu B'Shvat, you have to tithe from amongst themselves. That is one application of Tu B'Shvat. The second is with regards to the laws of Arla. So there's another law another halacha that when you plant a tree, you may not derive any benefit from it the first 3 years from when it's planted. When is it considered a new year for the tree? Now, you think I'm going to say Tu B'Shvat, but I'm not. Actually, it's considered a new year for the tree at Rosh Hashanah on the 1st of Tishrei. So if I planted a tree before Tishrei, so at least 30 days before at least, then already when you get to the 1st of Tishrei, you've finished a year and you're into the 2nd year. So whenever you plant the tree, it doesn't really matter when, except for very close to the 1st of Tishrei. But if it's at least a month out of Rosh Hashanah, I think it's a month, maybe 15 days, I forget, but sometime before Rosh Hashanah, the Rosh Hashanah of the 1st of Tishrei, the classic Rosh Hashanah, when we think of Rosh Hashanah, you plant a tree, so then for the first 3 years you can't benefit from the fruit. So you hit Rosh Hashanah 1, so that's 1 year. You hit Rosh Hashanah 2, that's the 2nd year. You hit Rosh Hashanah 3, that's the 3rd year. You would say, 3 years are up now, I should be able to eat from the fruit. That's where Tu B'Shvat comes in. And actually, even once you hit the 3rd Rosh Hashanah, the 3rd time that you hit the 1st of Tishrei, you still can't benefit from the tree until Tu B'Shvat. And this law of not benefiting from a tree in the first 3 years is called Arla. And once you hit Tu B'Shvat, so now you're allowed to benefit from that tree, except that the fourth year has its own special law. The fourth year is called Neta Rivai. The fourth year of a tree, um, of the life of a tree, the fruit must be brought to Yerushalayim to be consumed there, or again, they could be transferred over to money, and the money could be brought to Yerushalayim to be used there. But again, and that Neta Rivai, that fourth year is going to go until the next Tu B'Shvat. So from basically, so the first 3 years, so to speak, of a tree's life until it hits Tu B'Shvat, so it could be 3.5 years. It's the fruit are forbidden, and Tu B'Shvat is the Rosh Hashanah that now the fruit are permitted. But for that next year, they're not completely permitted. They are Neta Rivai, and they need to be brought to Yerushalayim or transferred onto money. So that's the practical halachic application of the day of Tu B'Shvat, and that's really all that there is in the early sources in terms of the significance of Tu B'Shvat. Now, the Gemara asks, why is Tu B'Shvat the cutoff for fruit? And this is the second source I put on the source sheet. It says that the first of Shvat, and just to remind ourselves, in the Mishnah it said there's two opinions about when the birthday for the trees is. Beis Shammai said it's the first of Shvat, and Beis Hillel said it's the 15th of Shvat. So the Gemara asks, what's the reason? What is the reason that the first of Shvat or the 15th of Shvat is the new year for the trees? Why is that the cutoff that we now consider that, that's the separate point for fruit? So explains the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Oshia, Hoel v'yatzarov gishmei shana. Since most of the year's rain have already fallen. So most of the rain has already fallen by the time you get to Tu B'Shvat. You're partially through the winter, and most of the rain has already fallen. Now, what's the significance that most of the rain has already fallen? So Rashi explains that if most of the rain has already fallen, so that means that the sap is now, the trees are now they've received most of their sustenance that they need to get through the dry months. They've received, or actually to produce the fruit that they're going to produce, and come the spring, and so they've received most of the water that they need, and since they and what's the significance? So they've at that point they've received most of the water. Okay. So what? So they've received most of the water at that point. So Tosfos elaborates, and Tosfos explains that if a fruit grew before Tu B'Shvat, then it means it's growing off the rain from the previous year. It's really any fruit that grows before Tu B'Shvat is being sustained by the rain from the previous year, and therefore it's considered a fruit of the previous year. While a fruit that only buds after Tu B'Shvat, we consider it that it grew from the rain of this year, because again, most of the rain has fallen by the time Tu B'Shvat comes, and so it's living off the rain that's fallen this year, and therefore it's considered anything that grows after that is considered to be living off the rain that fell this year. But a fruit that grows before that so is considered to have grown from the rain from the previous year. Okay, so that's the significance of this date. And just one more Gemara to quote that derives from a pasuk that you have kind of this confusing idea about Arla and Neta Rivai. So to remind ourselves again, I mentioned before that when you plant a tree, you can't benefit from the fruit for the first 3 years, and the tree we view the planting the cutoff date is the 1st of Tishrei. So as long as I planted it before the 1st of Tishrei, let's say I planted it in the summer. So come September, come the 1st of Tishrei, that's even though it could be just 2 months, it's considered a year already. And come the next Rosh Hashanah, that's the second year. Come the next Rosh Hashanah, that's the third year. And then come Tu B'Shvat, but still it's not permitted until Tu B'Shvat. Where does that come from? So the Gemara says, and it's the next source, and we'll just skip to the underlined part. In the Hebrew, it's underlined. In the English, it's not. But it says, Minahag Emili, where do we derive this idea? And it quotes a verse. The verse says, Uvashana Arbis, Uvashana Chamishis. So really, it's two different verses. It has the full verses in the English. So let's look at the English. The English says, the verse states, 3 years it shall be prohibited to you. This is that halacha of Arla, that when you plant a tree for the first 3 years, it's prohibited. It shall not be eaten. And in the 4th year. Now, and in the 4th year is really a new verse, but the Gemara kind of attaches it. It shall be prohibited for 3 years and in the 4th year, as in the prohibition continues into the 4th year. And where does it go to? What it teaches us, the Gemara explains, there are times that the tree is Ar against 4th year, and yet the fruit is forbidden as Arla, because even though it's only forbidden for 3 years, but it's also forbidden and in the 4th year up until Tu B'Shvat. There's an allusion there to the idea that the restriction extends to into the winter, and again, the sages derive, they maybe from tradition or maybe from their own idea that it goes until Tu B'Shvat, which is the point that the majority of the rain has fallen. Okay, and that's an allusion to this idea that the laws of Arla extend. Okay, so up until now it's been very technical, but actually that's kind of the point that I want to make, is that Tu B'Shvat is really, for the most part, a technical day. It's in the Mishnah, that's all it is. I shouldn't say all. It's significant when you're practicing these halachos, when they're relevant. These laws are relevant to you, so it's of course very significant. But in its origins, it's a pretty technical point in terms of the laws of Meiser, of tithing your fruit, and in the laws of Orla and Neter Rivai, of when you're allowed to benefit from fruit after you plant the tree, not until Tu B'Shvat into the 3rd year, and the Neter Rivai, which forbids it for 1 more year unless you consume it in Yerushalayim, or requires you to consume in Yerushalayim, continues until the following Tu B'Shvat. Okay, now let's try to make this a little bit more interesting, though. Okay, so one of the exciting parts about Tu B'Shvat is that you don't say Tachnun. In particular, on years like these where Tu B'Shvat is on a Monday, so it's a long Tachnun, in Shachris, the morning service, and you don't say Tachnun. So it has a celebratory feel to it. There's a celebration. Tachnun is usually not recited on days of joy. Tachnun is a very serious and kind of almost depressing tefillah, and very powerful at the same time. But it's not said on days of joy, and so we don't say Tachnun on Tu B'Shvat, and that is brought in the Shulchan Aruch. And over there, this is in Siman Kuf Lamed Aleph 131 in the Shulchan Aruch, the Magen Avram quotes an early custom, and the early custom, he says, Noagim ha-Ashkenazim. The Ashkenazim have the custom to enjoy many fruit from trees on Tu B'Shvat. So there's an idea to eat fruit on Tu B'Shvat. He doesn't mention Shivas Aminim, fruits of Israel, so that's also a custom. He just says that is the custom that Magen Avraham was writing in the, I want to say, late 1600s, and quoting an earlier custom, and Sephardic poskim, Kaf HaChaim adds, and Sephardim also have this custom, and it's also found very much in Sephardic tradition now as well. So there's this idea to have almost like a festive Tu B'Shvat meal. Tu B'Shvat, I shouldn't call it a meal, but some call it a seder, to eat fruit on Tu Tu B'Shvat. And it's interesting because we mentioned another Rosh Hashanah, the Rosh Hashanah for Meiser Behema, for tithing your animals, and we don't find anywhere that there's a custom to on the first of Elul, according to one opinion, the first of Tishrei, according to the other opinion, to specifically eat meat, because it's it's the Rosh Hashanah for animals, for tithing animals. If one of those opinions is that it's Rosh Hashanah, so many people end up eating meat because it's Yom Tov anyways, but not because it's the Rosh Hashanah for tithing animals. So why is it that we have this custom to have have fruit on Tu B'Shvat because it's the Rosh Hashanah for um it's the Rosh Hashanah for trees and for fruit? Well, we don't have the same concept by the Rosh Hashanah for tithing animals. We don't say you should eat animal meat on those days. So I saw this question quoted from Rav Moshe Feinstein, and in a drasha that he gave on Tu B'Shvat. And I don't have the original sefer, so I'm just working off um, of someone quoting it. So it's actually in my mind a little bit of an incomplete idea, but I'll share it anyways, and we could try to flesh it out together. So Rav Moshe suggested as follows. He says first of all he notes that actually this custom is much older than it appears. The custom to eat fruit on Tu B'Shvat, although we have it only in not only, we have it in the 1600s, quoting some earlier sources, and many think it relates to the Kabbalists. It's a Kabbalistic idea. Rav Moshe says it appears in earlier sources as well, and that's not necessarily a Kabbalistic idea. He wants to give a non-Kabbalistic explanation for why we eat fruit on Tu B'Shvat. And he begins with the question, why in the first place is there a halacha? Why does the law require that we tithe from one year separately from another year? So like I said, the significance of Tu B'Shvat is that it's the cutoff. Anything that budded before Tu B'Shvat, so those fruits are grouped together, and you have to tithe from those alone. And any fruits that bud after Tu B'Shvat, that's a separate department, and you tithe from those onto those. You have to make a separate calculation. He says, why is that? And we should note that the idea of tithing from one year on the other is learned from a pasuk. It's a Torah requirement. Although I should note that that I think tithing fruit in the first place is not a Torah requirement, but the Torah requirement is specifically on wheat, on the grains and grapes and olives, but at least for Truma, I think for Meiser, I think for tithing as well. I could be wrong, can't remember right now, but either way, the idea of tithing from one year on the other, that concept comes from the Torah. And so he asks, why is that you have to compartmentalize? Why can't I just take all my fruit and whatever I have last year's and this year's and just pile them all together and take 10%? Why do I have to keep separate and tithe from one year's fruit on that fruit and the other fruit on that fruit? So he says that something happened that kind of opened his eyes to the reason, perhaps. Rav Moshe Feinstein, he says that somebody came to him with a question, and the question had to do with tithing money. Right nowadays, like I mentioned, we have the idea of Meiser Ksafim, of tithing our income, and somebody said he made a lot of money, and he wanted to know, should he tithe his money now that he had a big gain, a big profit, and should he tithe it? And Moshe said, yeah, why wouldn't you tithe it? Why wouldn't you take Meiser? So the guy said, well, I'm worried that next month I'm going to suffer a loss. So it will offset my gains, and then I won't have profit, and then I won't, if I tithe now, then it will kind of be incorrect, because in the end I had losses that offset the gains, so I didn't profit as much. So he said, so when do you want to, so Moshe asked him, so when do you think you should tithe? When should you take the Meiser then? He said, maybe after 3 months, it'll be more clear if I profited or lost. And then the guy thought about it more and he said, well, actually, well, that's not necessarily going to prove anything because even if I'm still in the, you know, have gains, have profits after 3 months, but maybe after 6 months, I'll be in the loss column again and I'll suffer more losses. So I want profits. So so Ramosh said, okay, so when do you think you should tithe? Like when should you say I have profits? I'm going to separate Meiser. And apparently the guy finally said, well, maybe I'll just wait till I retire and I have my pension. So then I'll look back, I'll see how much I profited, and then I'll separate my Meiser. So practically speaking, that's a question about separating Meiser, how it should be done. You know, when should a person tally up their profits and their income? You know, is it based on a few months or based on a year? So there's different ideas, but Rav Moshe said that kind of opened his eyes to this whole concept that the Torah says when it comes at least to, again, the tithing of our income is a custom and it's less set how one has to do it. But when it comes to tithing fruit and produce, so it says you have to separate, you know, 1 year from the other. And he said the idea may have to do with this because a person because by making a cutoff, we're saying you have to accept this is what grew this year, and next year you might not have as much produce, um, and and you might have losses, you might have a whole you might not grow at all, but you you separate based on what grew this year, and he says that we find interestingly, right? What's the original tithe? The original tithe, the most basic one, is Ma'aser Rishon, goes to the Levi. So he points out that um, the Levium, so they don't, like we said, they don't get a portion in the land of Israel, and the other tribes have to give to them. Now, how many other tribes give to them? So how many tribes have a portion in the land of Israel? So it's not 12. It's actually 9.5, because 2.5 tribes took portions on the other side of the Jordan. So 9.5 tribes have portions in the land of Israel, and so they're tithing, and they take 10% for the Levi. And the Levi, 9.5 is like close to 10. It's basically that the Levi ends up, the Levium end up with 10% of being tithed, not just 10% of what grows, but they are 10% of the nation. Now it's not exact because they really, I guess there's 9.5 plus 1, so it ends up with 10.5. But it's close, give or take. He says they're about 10% of the tribes, and they're getting, in a certain sense, we're taking from 10% of all the fields. If you look at the whole land together, 10% of all the fields is going to that 10%, which is the Levium. So Ramosha says, in a certain sense, a way that we can look at this is that really those amongst all our fields, some of the land belongs to the Levium. Just Hashem, God lends it to us, so to speak. He lends it to us for us to then separate that tithe and give it to the Levium. But it says you have to keep each year separate, and now you might be worried. How can I give up what I grew this year? Next year I might not grow anything. I might not grow anything next year. So you might want to wait until I have, a bigger pile in front of me, and then separate. Torah says no. Torah says you count what you grew this year, you give the percentage, And if next year nothing grows, then so be it. But you count based on what grew each year. You keep it separated. And and now it's not the exact same. It doesn't work as well in the story that he gave because in the story there's profits and there's losses that offset profits. When it comes to Meiser, there's what grows and then there's what doesn't grow, but that's not a loss. It's just you don't have a profit. So it's not offsetting. But I think the concept still holds true that a person might be tempted to say, I'm going to wait to see what happens next year. Before I tithe, I want to see how much I have before I give it to the Levi. He's required to give it to the Levi, but he might want to wait to see how much how much grows, and I'll push it off. And once I have everything, then this year and next year, then I'll give it. Or this year, next year, and the next year, then I'll give it, right? And the Torah says, no, each year separate, count what grew that year and give it. And so it's a lesson in emunah, in putting your trust in Hashem. You give your meiser, and you tithe, you give it to the Levi, or you give it to the poor if it's a year for giving to the poor, and you don't concern yourself with what's going to happen next year. And
Rabbi,
yeah,
and it's also, you don't want the Levim have to wait so long that they starve to death waiting for the
yes,
Maser to show up.
right, right. Um, so that's a good point. So, and he says not only that, but in a certain way, this tithe is like us paying our rent on the field. The field really belongs to Hashem, and right, and that this reminds us that when we have to give a portion of it to Hashem or to His people, the Levim that represent Him, His representatives, so we remind ourselves that the field really belongs to Him, and this, and when we give that rent, so to speak, when we pay that tithe, we are we are not only if or let's go the other way. If we don't pay that tithe, in a certain sense, we're stealing the whole field. Everything that we grow there is stolen because we haven't paid our rent. We haven't paid for it. But by paying that by paying that amount to the Levium, to the Levites, then we're paying our rent. The whole thing now belongs to us. And and he adds, and the way of the world is if you don't pay your rent, then you get kicked out. So it's also, to pay that rent, to pay the Levium, to give them their portion, to give Hashem his portion, is a way of ensuring that we'll be able to stay on the field and be rewarded. Now, what does this have to do with Tu B'Shvat being the cutoff date and being a day of joy, a day of celebration, a day of feasting on those fruit? So Moshe says that this whole concept will instill us with a sense of joy, right? You might think, well, if you're telling me the field's not mine, that should make me sad, but it's the opposite. If we tell you the field belongs to Hashem and He's giving you a portion of it, and He's telling you, trust me, you give you give your portion, you give your rent, then you can be confident that you'll have fruit the next year. You can be confident that Hashem will take care of you. So you have nothing you don't have to worry. It's a day where we could put our worries aside about what's going to be the next year because it reminds us that this field really is Hashem's field. He gives it to us and He entrusts us. And if we do it, what we're supposed to do with it, if we treat it properly, so then we're going to have plenty the next year. So the Tu B'Shvat being the cutoff date, and again, the significance in halacha, the significance of Tu B'Shvat is it cuts off the Meiser of one year from the Meiser of the other year, and that reminds us of to trusting Hashem that what you have, and what will be next year will be next year. Put your trust in Hashem, and that day of Emunah, that day of trusting Hashem, is something that should bring us joy, and it's out of that joy that we are to celebrate on Tu B'Shvat, Narav Tachnun, and I guess have a little feast while enjoying the fruit that we have. Now, I guess what leaves me wondering still is why we can't say the same thing about Meiser Behema. because Meiser Behema, tithing animals, also you can't tithe from one year on the next, and you could kind of make the same calculation. His original question was, why don't we eat animal meat on the day of the Rosh Hashanah for Meiser Behema for tithing animals, which is either the first of El or the first of Tishrei. So, okay, it could be that that's different, but I'm going to leave that off as a question for now. I want to share a couple more ideas quickly um, about Tu B'Shvat. So, if we go back to the Mishnah, the Mishnah had said that it brought two opinions about what Tu B'Shvat is, the first source. One opinion is that, not about what Tu B'Shvat is, but what's the Rosh Hashanah, what is the new year for trees? One opinion is that of Beis Shammai, that it's the first of Shvat, and the second is the opinion of Beis Hillel, that it is the 15th of Shvat. And it would seem that they're arguing about, well, when do we say most of the rain has already fallen? Because we said that's what it's about, that this is the cutoff date when most of the rain has already fallen. Or at what point do we assume that any fruit that bud after this are from the previous year's rain? If they bud after this, they're from this year's rain. If they bud before this date, they're really growing off of the previous year's rain. So Beis Shammai said it's the first of Shvat, and Beis Hillel said it is the first of is the 15th of Shvat. Now, are they just arguing over like a practical, technical, scientific point? What we would call, is it a machlokus in mitzius? Is this a debate in terms of just how trees grow? Or is there something about how they look at things differently? It's a way that they view things is different. So with this, we come to a fascinating explanation of Rav Yosef Engel and the Rogachover Gaon. But to introduce it, we'll just mention a couple of questions on the Mishnah. First of all, the Mishnah says that the first of Shvat is Rosh Hashanah le'ilan. It's the Rosh Hashanah for the tree in the singular. Why does it say Rosh Hashanah le'ilan in the singular? Why does it say le'ilanos for trees? If you look in the Mishnah, when it talks about vegetables, it said plural, yirakos. When it talked about animals, it said, actually, no, there it said Meiser Behema, but that's describing the Meiser. It's like Yovulos. Everything up till now was in the plural. Melachim, Regalim, everything's in the plural. All of a sudden, Ilan is in the singular. Why is it in the singular? Secondly, it says Kidivrei Beis Shammai, like the opinion of Beis Shammai. Why does it say it that way? Why doesn't it say like it normally would say? Beis Shammai Omrim, Beis Shammai says this, and Beis Hillel says this. Why does it say like the words of Beis Shammai? So, and thirdly, like what exactly are there? Is this just an argument in Metzius and the practical of how the rain works, how things grow, or is there something else that they're arguing about? So before we share the answer of Rav Yosef Engel and the Rogachover, just quickly, the simple reason of why it says Kidivrei Beis Shammai, like the opinion of Beis Shammai, is explaining why this is in this Mishnah. Because really there's more Rosh Hashanahs. There's other cutoff dates. But this Mishnah only lists the ones that are on the first of a month. So at least one of the reasons that's given why it leaves out other ones is because it's only listing the ones that are on the first of a month. So it's only Kidivrei Beis Shammai, it's only like the opinion of Beis Shammai that this belongs in this Mishnah. Because only according to Beis Shammai is the first of the month a Rosh Hashanah. All the other ones mentioned here are on the first of the month. So it's only in this Mishnah, it's only that there's 4 Rosh Hashanahs on the first of a month according to Beis Shammai, and that's why it says Kidivrei Beis Shammai. That's one explanation why it says it in that strange way. Why doesn't it say Beis Shammai says, rather it says like Beis Shammai, it's saying there's 4 Rosh Hashanahs that are on the first of a month, like the opinion of Beis Shammai, as opposed to like the opinion of Beis Hillel. This wouldn't be in this Mishnah because it's not a Rosh Hashanah that's on the first of the month. Second thing I just want to mention is that when it says it's Rosh Hashanah le'ilan, a Rosh Hashanah for the tree, so there is a concept, quoting the early sources in the amongst the Kabbalists especially, that Tu B'Shvat is a day to daven for a beautiful esrog. And the B'nai Yissaschar says that this is hinted to in the word it's Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan, for the tree. That it's talking about the specific tree, reminding us of the specific tree, the esrog tree, and and that's alluded to in the by mentioning tree in the singular, that it's a special day for a certain tree, and that's the esrog tree, that there's an idea to daven for an esrog on the first of Tishrei, on Tu B'Shvat, on the Rosh Hashanah for trees. Okay, but in the time that doesn't remain, I'll share this idea of Rav Yosef Engel, and then we'll conclude. So he suggests that at the root of this dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is a much more fundamental dispute of how they look at things in general. There is a question raised in the Gemara in Zvachim. The Gemara wants to know, in general, we have a rule, Tadir v'sheino tadir, tadir kodem. If you have something that's common and something that's not common, that which is common comes first. So it's relevant in many areas, but it's relevant for, let's say, in the morning when a man puts on talis and tefillin, puts on his talis first, because talis is put on every day, and tefillin is not. Tefillin is not put on Shabbos and Yom Tov, so you put on talis first because it's tadir, it's more common. Many places this applies. So that's one rule. We have a second rule, that when it comes to karbanos, when it comes to offerings, that which is mekudash, the holier offering generally comes first. The holier offering comes first. If there's two offerings that are to be brought, the holier one comes first. The Gemara raises a question, what if you have a conflict? You have both something that's tadir, that one thing is more common, and the other thing is more holy. Which one comes first? How do those opposites? Usually more common beats out things that are of equal holiness, and more holy beats out things that are equally as common. But what happens when those clash? And the Gemara actually basically leaves it off as a question. It tries to bring proofs, but it doesn't really answer which one will win out, that which is more common or that which is more synced. Now, there is a dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about how we should make Kiddush on Shabbos night. And I put it in the sources, it's the last source. Beis Shammai says we first see there's two brachos in Kiddush on Friday night. There's the bracha on the wine, Borei Pri Hagafen, and there's the bracha on Shabbos, Mikadesh HaShabbos. Which one comes first? So Beis Shammai says you make the bracha on Kiddush first, and then you make the Hagafen. And Beis Hillel says you make the bracha on the wine first, Hagafen, and then you make the bracha on Kiddush. And that's what we do. We have Borei Pri Hagafen, and then we have the bracha Mikadesh HaShabbos, like Beis Hillel. What are they arguing about? So there's different ideas, but in the Yerushalmi it says they're arguing over this very point. Which wins out? Tadir, that which is more common, or Mikudash, that which is more sanct? Beis Shammai says that you make Kiddush first, because the bracha of Kiddush is holier than the bracha of Hagafen, and so it comes first. Even though the bracha of Hagafen is more common, but that which is more holy comes first. And Beis Hillel says that which is more common comes first. And so you make the bracha of Hagafen first before you make the bracha of Kiddush. Now, this actually decides that so Beis Shammai is taking the side that Mikudash, that which is more sanct, overrides that which is more common, and Beis Hillel takes the side that which is more common overrides that which is more sanct. Say the commentaries that this actually is indicative or relates to the very essence of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel was more numerous than Beis Shammai. They were more common, so to speak. They were more numerous. But Beis Shammai, we don't want to use the word was more holy, but they were as opposed to quantitatively better, they were qualitatively better. The Gemara describes them as charif. They were more sharp. They were brighter. And so Beis Hillel, who's taking the side that being more common or greater in number, quantitatively greater, wins. Beis Hillel was quantitatively greater. Beis Shammai, who takes the side that qualitative, mikudash, being holier, wins. Well, Beis Shammai was qualitatively greater. They were more charif. They were more sharp. Now, the halacha, we have a tradition, follows Beis Hillel. So the halacha says that which is more common comes first, and that's why when we make Kiddush, we say Hagafen before we say Mekadesh HaShabbos. What does this have to do with Tu B'Shvat? So the commentaries explain that the that when we say that the fruits, when we say that the first of Shvat or the 15th of Shvat is the cutoff point, so that's when we expect fruit to start budding. Now, not all fruit buds around at the same time. Fruit buds at different times. So most fruit don't bud until the 15th of Shvat. But there are some fruit which are very quick, very charif. Actually, the Gemara uses the word charif to describe things that kind of come early. They grow already on the 1st of Shvat. So Beis Shammai, who says we just look at the qualitative. That which is holier, that which is charif, that's what wins. So even though it's a very small minority of fruit that start to bud already on the 1st of Shvat, but Beis Shammai looks at who's the more charif, who's the sharper, who's the faster, that's what we go by. So we declare the first, since some fruit are already budding on the 1st of Shvat, so we declare the 1st of Shvat as the cutoff point, as the Rosh Hashanah. And Beis Hillel says, no, we go by the majority. Most fruit don't start to bud until the 15th of Shvat. And therefore, we have the 15th Shvat as the cutoff point. And that could be why Beis Shammai says, and the Mishnah says that, so first of all, when it says it's Kedivrei Beis Shammai, the first of Shvat is the Rosh Hashanah for trees, like the words of Beis Shammai, meaning like the words of Beis Shammai, which are charif, which are sharp, so too the Rosh Hashanah for the trees follows Beis Shammai, according to Beis Shammai, follows is the 1st of Shvat when the sharpest fruit, the quickest fruit are budding already. It's a minority, but we should follow that, says Beis Shammai. And that's also why he says it's Rosh Hashanah le'ilan in the singular. He says, I don't care if it's only one tree, that's budding. Even if it's just one tree already. But since there are trees that start to bud already from the 1st of Shvat, says Beis Shammai, that should be the cutoff point. And but we don't call it that. We call it Tu B'Shvat Rosh Hashanah le'ilanot. It's the song, right? Tu B'Shvat Yigia Chag le'ilanot. So we call it the Rosh Hashanah le'ilanos for the trees. That fits. That's because we go with Beis Hillel. We go with Beis Hillel that we go by when do the majority of trees start to bud, and that is only after the 15th of Shvat. That should be the cutoff date. So according to this, they're not arguing about when trees start to bud. They agree that most trees start to bud the 15th of Shvat, and they agree that some trees start to bud on the 1st of Shvat. But Beis Hillel is going with his outlook, which is you go by the majority. You go by what's more common, what's tadir, and you go by the majority, and therefore we go by the 15th of Shvat. But Beis Shammai says that we go by what's more qualitatively better, what's charif, what's sharp. We're the sharper ones, and you go by the trees that are quick on the uptake. Those trees that bud early, that's what will establish when the new year for the trees will be. So a very fascinating explanation of attributed to, again, I didn't see this, I saw this quoted from Rav Yosef Engel and the Rogachover to explain this dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel as to when the new year for the trees should be. Okay, we will hold there.
Thank you.